From the University of Missouri, Kansas City's Bloch School of Management, welcome to The Journey to Leadership, a shared knowledge podcast for those seeking leadership advice from those that have done it or are about to do it. Each week, this podcast spotlights a community champion from the public, private, or not-for-profit sector. We talk individual success, comebacks, and lessons learned. Today's journey profiles Andy Rieger, co-owner of Jacob Rieger Distillery Company, which was founded in 1887, closed its doors during Prohibition in 1919, and reopened again in 2014 with his business partner, Ryan Maybee. Andy's been named both a next-gen leader and Kansas City's Power 100 by the Kansas City Business Journal. And he's the lead force behind the growth of the J-Rieger Company brand and the revival of Kansas City's historic Electric Park neighborhood, located at 2700 Gwinnett in the East Bottoms of Kansas City, Missouri, where this interview took place. Here's your host, Gary O'Bannon, Executive in Residence at the Bloch School.
Let's begin today's journey. Andy, welcome back to the journey.
Thanks for having me again, Gary.
What has happened to you and J-Rieger on this particular journey since we last spoke on March 6th, which happened to be 10 days before the pandemic caused much of the shutdown?
The night of Wednesday, the 11th of March, when the NBA announced they were ending their season or suspending their season. And that was the first real moment, because you're watching it on the news, you're seeing how it's starting to become some of the restrictions that are slowly starting to be placed on certain areas within the country, and it's very isolated at that point in time.
And in a billion-dollar business.
And then it just all of a sudden, when it hits something that everyone pays attention to, no matter where you're located, even across the world, that was the first moment that it really hit. And we actually sat in this room the next morning. I invited a bunch of other people that run companies here in Kansas City, sat here for about 3 hours, talked about it, watched the stock market completely plummet and had the circuit breakers hit a couple of times in those 3 hours that we were talking. And it just felt like the most surreal situation that we could have possibly ever had. So that was the 12th then when we had that meeting. Okay. And we started just these morning calls every single morning to just hear about how everyone was reacting. And
same group?
The same group, and even expanded it a little bit to about 10 people that ran companies in Kansas City. And the calls transitioned from what are we thinking, what are we hearing, what are we seeing, to being much more HR related. How do I terminate employees? How do we shut down? How do we renegotiate leases? And they went from let's prepare to this is somber and real. And so then on the 16th, like we said, that was the day on that Monday that all the restrictions were placed. Those restrictions ultimately shut down our business here of welcoming people into our space. They also shut down half of our customers, the bars and restaurants across the entire country that we sell to. And almost overnight, we were left with 10, 20% of our revenue source that we had before then. So it was a pretty shocking, pretty unbelievable turn of events from, whether you call it a 7-day period or you call it a 3-day period, however you really want to evaluate.
So what were you hearing from the employees when you had to have discussions with them about either furloughs or laying them off semi-permanently? What were those conversations like, and what were the reactions?
Yeah, early on when COVID really hit and we started having these discussions, it wasn't necessarily an engaging time period where everyone was even thinking clearly. Everyone was crying for the most part, and no one knew what to do, and everyone saw the writing on the wall of, we just have seen all of our revenue go to zero, and everyone knew there was no way that we could pay the bills, there was no way we could pay the staff. Everyone was just in it to try to figure out, how do we survive? How do we stay together? Everyone loved being together, everyone loved working with each other. And so everyone wanted to figure out a way as to how they could actually propel through it as one and come out of it even stronger. And it was during that, that first week that the tears were truly beyond anything that you could imagine really as an adult, of just being responsible for 60 plus families that all work for you, and what's going to happen to all of them when we have to let all of these people go, and all of them are on the unemployment lines. And this was also before any form of government program was out there, and so as part of that also, I was having daily conversations with some of our U.S. Senator teams just to try to get into their ear as to here's what's happening on the ground, and they were incredibly receptive as well because they didn't know how to react. No one knows how to react.
Of course.
Even the highest of elected officials have no idea how to handle something like this, and so all they can do is listen. And they did a really fantastic job of doing that.
So you reinvented J-Rieger, much to your credit. And is it true that you received a phone call from a nursing home operator who emailed you or called you and was asking whether or not you had the capacity to start creating hand sanitizer?
Yeah, so my wife answers she's our brand director, and she answers our main general email address. And someone from a nursing home in Kansas City emailed her saying, hello, I've seen that this distillery in Washington or Washington or Oregon is making hand sanitizer and nursing homes are using it. Is there any way that you guys would be willing to do that for us? And we looked at it, and we had been seeing that some other distilleries were doing this, but they were all doing it on very small scales. You know, a couple hundred 2-ounce bottles, donating them, and not making a huge dent in the real problem. And it was a lot of work for not a lot of true community benefit. And so initially, at first glance, we just thought, it's not going to help you in the long term. It's not going to help us in the short term at all. So it's probably not going to be worth it. And that person came back and said, please, is there any way that you could just think about doing it just for us? And we really looked at it, and I thought about it with my entire team. And ultimately, we were sitting in this room, and everyone was really supportive of the idea. And that was when, seeing everyone's genuine support, I just said, if we're going to do this, then we're going to do this in a big way, and we're going to make a dent in the real problem, because I don't want to do this in a way that is going to just help one person or one group of people, but instead we're going to fill the void until the big guys that do this every single day are able to catch up with the real supply gap that we have in our entire city. And from that moment forward, our entire team, everyone just completely redirected their focus. Everyone wanted to do it. Everyone wanted to be a part of it. People were working till 3 a.m. People were working 16, 18-hour days.
Wow.
No one cared. Everyone just wanted everyone else to survive. Everyone wanted this company to survive, and everyone saw that we can do all these things and fill the biggest void that arguably our community has ever had in terms of an immediate need in a lifetime. Why not do it?
Absolutely.
And so we all just went gung-ho, and we constantly were adjusting, figuring it out. But over the first couple days that we did it, we really didn't understand the impactfulness of what it was and how much it was needed until we held a public sale. And we had a line of cars 2 miles long constantly for about 4 hours, and we sold out. And we kind of scratched our heads and said, we thought we were ramped up. We need to seriously ramp this up. And from that moment forward, for about 2 solid months after that, we had people working roughly 16 hours a day between 2 shifts, just constantly making and bottling hand sanitizer to be put out there in the marketplace.
Boy, that's fantastic. You didn't really do the hand sanitizer portion of it to really make money. That was really more of a community effort, correct?
We didn't even know if anyone would buy it.
Right.
And so we kind of just jumped into it. Fortunately, it became the thing that ended up keeping us alive.
Oh, that's great.
And so we started out thinking bottled cocktails, food to go, those were going to be the things that were going to be able to get us through.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, we pretty much ended all of that because we said, this works for us, and we need to dedicate all of our resources to it.
And now, supplies have come back a little in terms of the hand sanitizer. So have you seen a natural dip, or
Oh, yes.
or have you kind of gotten people used to your sanitizer?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've absolutely seen a dip, and it was fully expected.
Sure.
But, I think a big part of where we're at now with sanitizer is people don't know what to do or what to expect or even how to reopen. And so part of it is, yes, the supplies and the flooding of supplies has become excessive, but a big part of it also that we're seeing, especially hyper-locally now, before, we were helping out the entire Midwest. We would have hospitals calling saying, please, can we get some, we have to have it, whatever that. Now we're really focused locally. And the companies that are buying it for their reopening efforts are wanting to purchase it from us to support us, because they know that everyone that works here, when they're buying it, it's staying within the community. It is money that won't be leaving Kansas City. It won't be leaving America. And it's not some conglomerate overseas. And I think that's the biggest thing that people are realizing with the sanitizer, at least, is if you want to buy really cheap sanitizer, it's probably being made overseas. And is that where you want to spend your money in a time like this when you just suffered because of something that came from overseas?
Exactly. So are you going to get out of the sanitizer business, or is this always now going to be part of your formula?
So, well, interestingly enough, that's something that we feel it's part of our identity now.
It is.
And we have a beautiful historical exhibit that talks about the history of the brand and the company and the building that we're in.
It's a chapter.
And the area.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, this is a new chapter of J-Rieger & Co. that even in the middle of it, we realize that it's something that we sooner than later need to work on to add it to the historical exhibit because it is that important to the history of J-Rieger & Co.
Yeah.
It's Prohibition all over again.
Yeah.
Something that could have killed us.
That's right.
We instead figured out a way to survive to get through it.
Well, and another way you found out to survive is you got your catering license.
We did.
And tell me how that's working, because people can't come in, but you can always go out, right?
So one of the things that we've always tried to do is have the flexibility to do whatever type of situation allows us to grow. Whether that is a singular type event or that is something that can become a new business line for us. And so we have our wholesaler's license, so we can sell directly to festivals that have liquor permits that are one-time type sales, restaurants that don't necessarily order enough liquor to purchase from a distributor, so instead they just have ours, or things like a catering license. If offices are going to want to start to come back and have in-office parties as opposed to going out, we want to be able to ensure that we don't miss out on the opportunities when we could grab a hold of those opportunities and really grow with them. So we haven't done anything yet because the offices aren't really open yet. But having that flexibility and offering that is something that when people are calling for events, our events coordinator is able to say, we can also come to you. We can send a bartender, we can send charcuterie boards, we can send whatever, and you can have this at your office and not go into a foreign building.
Without getting too detailed, how has this now flipped your whole business plan and your business model and your strategic plan? Now that you got the catering, you now have the hand sanitizer, and then pretty soon you're going to open your doors back up.
In terms of flipping, before COVID, we had a really fun business. Our business is based on manufacturing and distribution of alcohol. We were able and fortunate enough to just be able to open a beautiful facility in Kansas City's East Bottoms neighborhood. And we didn't really want to change that. But what we had discovered throughout COVID and even before COVID is in order to survive, you have to have some form of what I call a revenue cocktail. And that revenue cocktail changes from time to time. But the cocktail has to equal a full glass. And so what at the time that you are looking at, what is that cocktail made of? Different products, different experiences, different efforts, whatever that may be. You just have to try to fill your glass to as close to full as you possibly can. And as long as it stays full, you're surviving. Your employees are surviving, the business is going forward, and everything's going to be okay. That's what we're really going for right now. The difference, though, is over the last 3 months, the shift from almost a week-to-week basis of how that cocktail is made up has been so extreme that it's very difficult to really plan in the future. And that's why we just have to be able to be ready to accept any of these opportunities that allow us to pour in another component to continue to try to fill up that cocktail.
Are you still talking to the consortium that you were talking to when this first began? Are you still meeting weekly or by Zoom or however?
No, not in that sense, but I mean, texting, calling.
Yes.
I had a couple of them over on Saturday night for discussions and stayed up till 1 a.m. just sitting outside talking. So it's still happening, it's just in a less formal perspective. But I mean, early on, talking every 24 hours almost seemed like not enough. I would get home and my wife and I's routine every single night is watch Lester Holt when we get home, and we always DVR it.
Yeah.
And we would get home at night, and again, we were working 16-hour days. We get home at 11 p.m., and our kid was asleep, and we would turn on Lester Holt to sit on the couch to feel normal for a few minutes, and that show gets recorded at 5:30, it ends at 6. We got home at 11, turn it on, and within 5 hours, we said, we can't even watch this because it's stale.
Oh.
The news is so out of date over just 5 hours that it wasn't even worth our time. And it was a very weird feeling and almost surreal to say 5-hour-old news in the evening is no longer relevant to what's happening right now. And something that you'll probably never experience again with how rapidly the news was changing and how quickly you had to adapt to what was really going on.
And then you had to figure out which you could really find credible and not credible, because there's been so many changes and so many reiterations of some of the same information as well.
Yeah, that's it. One of the things that I learned pretty quickly was to pay attention to the bullet points of legislation drafts. Don't try to really look too deep into them, because the legislation that was enacted, whether it was 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the bills that were passed that were major bills during that time period, were so vastly different than when they first came out. And they changed so much over time that if you got caught in the minutia, as so many of my friends did, trying to read it, then by the time they got through the relevant portions, the next one came out, and they had just wasted 6 hours of their time getting through all those relevant portions and realized they could have done 100 other things to try to help their business.
So last pandemic that's getting all the news was 1918, the last major one, global pandemic. There was no playbook for you to take off the shelf. Is there going to be a playbook for the next go round because of what you have had to go through and finding ways to survive, to be left for like the next generation? Is there any thought to that?
I really think that with what happened with this pandemic that we are in the middle of, you can't plan for a pandemic and what to do other than knowing what makes sense and what doesn't, right? We've learned that general social distancing, wearing masks, those things help. Everyone agrees. Those things are very good things. But transitioning to hand sanitizer, absolutely, that's a great thing. But will the next pandemic, will that matter? Does it matter, and can it spread that way, or does it spread in a totally different way?
Sure.
And so everything is really case-by-case basis, but the biggest thing is just not giving up and really listening to your employees, listening to the public, hearing where the needs are, and what can you do to adjust your business in order to figure out a way to survive. Because you don't need to change your business forever. Maybe we have a new product line forever, maybe we don't, but just being able to adapt ever so slightly to create opportunity is something that we're really trying to focus on, that I would pass on to future generations.
But this is a battle like no other, obviously. So how is Andy Rieger doing, and how is your family doing through March Madness and beyond?
So we, like I said earlier, I've never cried as much in my adult life as I did during this. And the weight was twofold. One of losing every single thing that you've ever worked for, and the other one was every single one of your employees that you have told them to their face, I'm going to fight like hell for you and your family to make sure that everything is good. And the failure on both fronts is almost overwhelming. But it was the inability to know what the next phase of it, with the news changing so rapidly early on, that just destroyed you internally, and not knowing if people were going to be able to have paychecks or if the bank was going to come knocking. I mean, I'll never forget walking inside my house one night. It was 10:30, 11, and literally walked in the kitchen, and my wife had gotten home 15 minutes before me, and she was pretty somber, just trying to eat something. 6.5 months pregnant at the time, about to have our second child.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And she just saw how depressed I was, and I literally just collapsed on my knees and just like slouched down and was just bawling in tears. And then she started bawling. I mean, it was just this.
Well, it's probably cathartic.
And that was 100%. And it was, and that wasn't a singular event. I mean, it was every day, multiple times a day. I mean, I couldn't have conversations with our employees that would try to cheer me up, because they were like, we'll be fine. Like, you focus on getting us all through this, but take us out of your equation. And I would start talking to them about it, and I just couldn't not cry. And it was so emotional. So eventually, after about 6-7 weeks, we were able to not work 7 days a week. And that was a really big relief for us, when we could have some form of personal time back. And I started a new thing with my kid, where every single weekend, one of the days, we either go get donuts or bagels. And he's 2 years old and he loves it. And we take my dog with us, and my wife, who's pregnant, she sleeps in, and I take him. We go get those bagels, and then we eventually bring them back to mom. And that's sort of our like Saturday or Sunday morning. And it was sort of that bit of home and that bit of normalcy. that I had been missing for so long, and just getting to spend legitimate time with your kid is something that you really can't replace.
And maybe you've already answered this question, but I want to hang on to this for just a little bit more, because there's a lot of people who are feeling still the way you did during that time period. What advice can you give them other than what you have said? I mean, how do they get past that, and what advice can you give to those individuals?
Well, so talking about it from the economic perspective first, you see that everyone pays attention. I mean, if it's students and they weren't, around during the 2008-2009 crisis, then we kind of saw the mistakes. Everyone taking the most aggressive action against the opposing parties, no matter who you were, to try to better themselves. As opposed to this crisis was a little bit different. This crisis really opened up the humanity in a lot of people, and it was less about the aggression towards others to try to better yourself, but instead everyone, for the most part, coming together saying, hey, if we all are on the same page that everyone's suffering, maybe we can all get through this in a way that we all come out on the other side looking pretty similar to how we looked before this. And that was something that you didn't know on the very beginning. And so looking at on this other end, realizing that if you're struggling on a financial side, just speak to the party that you're struggling with. Let them know your circumstance. Be honest with them. And perhaps it's something that person says, let me help you out here. Maybe we extend your lease another 2 months and we take these 2 months off of payments so that it's a 14-month lease and not a 12-month lease. Or same thing with car payments, or whatever that may be.
Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hiding behind whatever it is that's going on is absolutely the wrong way to handle it. From the emotional perspective, crying is normal, and being able to cry helps you get through things because it removes the element of you being a ticking time bomb.
That's right.
And so
That's right.
The more that you can get out of you emotionally, the more you can think more clearly. And then truthfully just being informed and trying to learn. The worst thing that you can see, and sometimes we have to pull some of our own employees out of this every now and then, or friends out of this, is don't feel sorry for yourself. Don't be somber and say, that's it. I guess this is just the way it is. Fight, because everyone has that in them, and until you're forced to fight, you don't really understand that you can fight and try to get through something in a positive way.
You know what? That is great advice. I don't want to forget to ask about your business partner, Ryan.
Yeah.
How did he hold up? And I'm sure are your personalities the same or
totally different?
Totally different.
Totally different.
And maybe it's not appropriate for me to ask you to tell us how he responded to it, but did he come at it from a different angle?
I mean, Ryan's always been like an emotional support for me because he's always looked at things from a very positive light. And I've always looked at things from a very negative light. And
really? I don't even pick that up on you. From you,
I'm a pessimist, naturally.
Yeah. Well, maybe a realist, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
A realist pessimist.
Yeah.
Ryan, from all of this, Ryan oversees our sales team, and that's his specialty. And so with this, really the goal for the sales team was just be supportive in the marketplace. Just walk into stores, walk into bars, walk into restaurants, walk into liquor stores, places that are our customers, and just check on them. We're not selling them anything. We're not trying to do anything to them. Just be an emotional support to them. And how are you feeling? How are you doing? We're here if you need anything. Just let us know. And just that little bit of touching was something that our entire sales team, it really helped them get through it because they got to experience it and collect information to see how our city was reacting, but also it gave them outlets to have conversations with people that allowed them to get things off their chest and allowed other people to get things off of their chest with people that they're not with every day. So you don't have to be as vulnerable. You can just be much more honest and blunt about what's really going on. And so that was really a big element of what the sales team did during that time. And it was so important for them to be able to do that to really help us understand, how do we attack this? How do we understand what to do? What's right? What's wrong? What are people saying? Because every single city is different. So listening to the national news during this time about what's happening in New York City, while incredibly sad as to how hard hit it was, it didn't apply at all to Kansas City. So if that's how you were approaching everything as to what to expect when you walk out of your doors, it's just not the truth with what was going on. So being able to collect that ground information was something that really allowed us to make the best decisions possible.
So let's look ahead. Near future, what is in store and what's the plan for J-Rieger going forward?
We are going to reopen our facility to the
Congratulations.
public.
Great.
Thank you. That is something that most of our staff is on board with. Some staff have concerns over health and safety, and so gladly, we're very happy that we have a rich unemployment program right now.
Yeah, it ends July 31.
Yeah. So we've basically told all of them, why don't you do this, and then come August 1st, let's just kind of look at the situation and see where we're all at and see if this is something that you feel like coming back is appropriate for you or not. So that's been very beneficial in the sense that it's not necessarily a huge drop-off of what unemployment might be. So on that side, reopening, while not at the same level as what it was before, we kind of have a feeling that people are excited to get back out.
Ready.
And our building is really large. As of today, we don't have a patio. And so a big element with that, though, is it's going to be very hot very soon. And so will people get over the outside element and say, I need to be inside? But because this is such a big, wide open space, no matter where you are within our facility, that it's something that people really look forward to because they can have, again, some form of normalcy. But again, still not being able to sit at a bar is very, very difficult. So that's one element for us. The liquor stores have always been open, so that's been another outlet for us. And then being that bars and restaurants across the country are reopening, that is our third leg of restaurants or sales avenues that are going to be reopening. So being able to see things sort of return back to normal is something that we're really looking forward to. But how normal or how quickly do you get back to normal is another element altogether.
So I'm hearing in the news all the time about space ratios and marks on the floor and how many people you can let in the door because your facility, beautiful by the way, just beautiful building. Do you see that type of reconfiguration, or is your space big enough, as you said before, where that's not going to really be a big concern?
No, for us here, I mean, we're in a building that was constructed in 1901, 60,000 square feet. There's 20,000 square feet of various retail space. So the ability to spread people out naturally without disrupting the experience is something that we really want to do. We really focused on two things with this facility when it comes to the guest experience, and that is being social and having alcohol. Well, it's really tough to be social in an environment where you're not allowed to be social. So being that we're several months past the most excessive restrictions that were very necessary at the time, it's allowed us to reevaluate how we open in a way that makes people comfortable, but also makes our staff comfortable. That's another big element of this, is having the staff that want to be there and feel like you're taking all the proper precautions. So there will be some changes that only if you know what the facility looked like before that you would understand. But the most obvious one that the public will see is there will be no bar stools because you're not allowed to sit at the bar right now. And so that's very unfortunate because our bartenders no longer get to be social with the guests. But there'll be high tables near the bar so that people can sit near the bar. Tables won't need to be spaced apart any more than they already are. So that's something. We have just a bunch of couch areas and booth areas and things of that sort, and everything's far enough apart that we won't really need to manage that process overall. So being able to truthfully have it to where you're not disrupting the guest experience was something that we really wanted to wait to reopen until we could ensure that we were at least offering the guest experience something that we felt was appropriate to showcase not just our building, not just our brand, but provide the guest with something that they're going to leave with saying, that was a great time, coronavirus or not.
What do you think the market's going to look like? And let me just say, your competitors. I mean, what do you think the market's going to look like once this opens back up? Will some not make it, or does everybody seem as though they have a plan to reopen?
Oh, I mean, I think that if you're talking about the restaurant industry as a whole, the bar industry as a whole, no, not everyone is going to make it. The biggest fear that I really have is, the more places that open, the more reason that people want to start to go out again. And the more places that open, the more places start to look at each other and say what works and what doesn't for keeping everybody safe. So it's a little bit, unfortunately, of trial by error and being able to look and learn from everyone else's mistakes or successes along the way. But being able to have all these places reopening, you're naturally going to have to create the demand for people to want to come out. And that lag, whatever that lag is for the places that don't achieve the demand that they would need up front to be able to keep the doors open, you'll most likely start to see even more places close the doors that maybe tried to reopen, or places that say it's just not worth it anymore. Maybe the business wasn't doing great financially before. There's no point in continuing to try to do this anymore. So I think there will be a lot of closures, a lot of bankruptcies once that becomes more of the norm. But the real goal is to try to ensure that you keep things going forward as much as possible in the safest way possible. And forcing people to go out is absolutely not the right way. But we scratch our heads and say, when will event businesses even come back? When will anybody feel comfortable going to a 200-person party or a wedding or anything that is more than just a group of friends going out and having dinner? So that's something that we're all yet to see. And I think once you start to see those events along those sizes of company events, things that are really big drivers for retail industry, once that comes back around, then you'll finally start to see the concerts and the sporting events as really the last bits and pieces.
Any final words?
I would say that for us as a company during this, for us as people during this, there's nothing that people should ever focus on in a pandemic more than just what is your definition of being humane, and how do you act as a person, not as a corporation, not as a greedy individual, whatever that may be. How do you do the things that progress society as a whole and get them through it so that ultimately you come out stronger? And the unfortunate side of a pandemic like this is we had times where we had hospitals all over the country asking for sanitizer and we couldn't get it out fast enough. So we had to choose who got it. And it was a very weird time for us that we had to tell people from the public, I'm so sorry you don't get any because this hospital needs it, or this doctor's office needs it, or these first responders need it, or these government officials or these utility providers need it, because without them, if you have no power, good luck with all of this going on. And so then even with hospitals, we had to focus and say, the local hospitals in Kansas City, unfortunately, are going to get it before you all do. And so we had to pick and choose even on that front. And so really that element of community and camaraderie became bizarre and weird. But again, everything was focused back on what we feel is the most right thing to do in this particular situation. That situation changed every 5 minutes. And so being able to take a step back, take a breath, look at all the facts, step forward with what you thought the best solution, whether permanent or temporary, was something that we had to do on a daily basis, hourly basis, by the minute basis. And it was something that we hopefully feel that people look at us and say, you did a pretty good job along the way.
Well, that's guaranteed. Andy, your passion, your commitment to the community, and your survival instincts are infectious. So that's why we wanted to get you back on the Journey to Leadership podcast, because you always have very wise words and you always have a good strategy that I think people can learn from. That's why you were the #1 rated speaker of the business school class, is because they took so much from you. And so hopefully we will be back and maybe talk to you again after you open up for another couple of months, and we'll have you back on as well.
And the best thing is we've been making whiskey this whole time.
That's right. So you've got plenty of it already. All right.
Journey to Leadership is supported by the UMKC Bloch School of Management. We would like to thank Bloch School Dean Brian Klaus, Associate Dean Brian Anderson, Program Chair Jeff Hornsby, Producer Editor Damon Smith, and KC Street Notes. The comments and opinions expressed on the show, either by the guest or host, are not intended to reflect those of UMKC, the Bloch School, the University of Missouri System, or any of its officials. Until next time, enjoy your journey.